So it was a reefer load, filet mignon, almost $100,000 cargo value. The load was supposed to pick up in Iowa and go to Atlanta, but we did ask the driver if we could ping his cell phone so we knew where the truck was and knew where the cargo was, and he said no problem. And about a couple hours after loading, we noticed that the truck was going to Chicago. Later that morning, we came in to ping the driver, and we couldn't ping the driver. And I called the owner of the trucking company, and he said, Todd, I don't know what to tell you. My driver's gone, my truck is gone, and the cargo is gone. So we literally had a $100,000 load of filet mignon disappear in downtown Chicago. But I think the city ate well that weekend.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Todd Ziegler. Todd is the CEO of TCS Blockchain and is leading a revolution of innovation, making B2B blockchain settlement industry standard in transportation trade finance. TCS settles freight invoices on the same day or the next business day, up to 90% cheaper than invoice factoring. Todd has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Dayton and a Doctor of Law from Western Michigan University. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Todd.
Todd, welcome to the Corporate Couch this morning.
Thanks for the invite, Jeff. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, we met through my junior high and high school friend, Lisa Syme, who's a Web3 digital asset, DeFi, decentralized finance expert, and very excited to talk to you because you're in the heart of this space in the trucking industry. So yeah, it's going to be a great conversation, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we actually met personally out at the HDAX event in Kansas City.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I
Briefly, but
that.
yeah, great event.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, it was actually great. And yeah, speaking of that, I actually just putting together the podcast for that, and we're putting the finishing touches on it. I interviewed Heidi Lehman, the founder of HDAX, Heartland Digital Asset Exchange, and yeah, so that'd be great. But yeah, it was great meeting you, and thanks for reminding me that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Todd, even though people know you fairly well, what hobby that you have or a trait you have that would surprise people about you?
I don't know if it would surprise anybody, but this isn't TCS was not my first rodeo as an entrepreneur. I think a lot of people would say that I'm pretty tenacious, and you have to be, right. It's not easy to bring new products and solutions to market, especially when they're innovative, especially when the industry is nascent, especially when you have tons of regulatory headwinds and obstacles that most new businesses don't face. But I think, most of the people, who know me would say that, I'm a pretty tenacious guy and pretty focused.
Okay. And where'd you grow up, and what was fun for you growing up?
Yeah, I grew up in Southwest Ohio, about a stone's throw from Cincinnati. Played a little football. I was a pretty good swimmer. I actually swam for Wright State University when I was like 9 years old. Back then, they didn't have like the club team, so it was like if you wanted to do winter swimming, you had to like swim for a college or university. I think that's
Wow.
changed. But yeah, I was a really active young person, always on the move,
Yeah.
sometimes to the detriment of my teachers, right? But that's how it goes.
Kids aren't made to sit in chairs for long periods of time, and I don't think adults should be either. But
Yeah.
yeah. I'm curious. What position did you play in football?
Back then, well, and it may still be the same now. You played both sides, right? So
Yep.
I was a running back on offense, which I'm now kind of questioning, right? Because the helmets were not what they are now back
Right.
then, and then I was a safety on defense.
Okay. I was going to say if you were like an offense or defensive lineman and also a swimmer, I was going to say that would be a special talent. But running back, safety, I
Yeah,
get, yeah, you
yeah.
would be a good
Back then,
swimmer.
I had some wheels, not so much anymore.
Any aspirations as a child, like, hey, when I grow up, I'm going to be in the NFL or a doctor? Or
Well, I always wanted to do, something interesting professionally. I think that's, how I landed in law school and thought for a while that, I wanted to practice law, but I graduated from law school in 2006. And during that process, I kind of realized that the business of practicing law is very challenging, right? The metrics are difficult. It's like the better you are, the more hours you work. And I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always been into business development. I've always been into this idea of leveraging assets in lieu of leveraging time. So decided to go a different route after law school, but I was always kind of shooting to do something in terms of graduate education.
I know you went to University of Dayton. It looked like you graduated there with a BA. What did you always want to go to law school? Like, was that your plan when you went to Dayton?
Actually, it wasn't, and I ended up at the University of Dayton getting involved with the mock trial program, which competes nationally. And then I ended up as a leader in that program, and I ultimately graduated with a double major in history and political science. There's not a whole lot you can do with that other than go to law school, so that was kind of the logical progression.
Uh, and I'm always curious. Did you go you graduated Dayton, and then you went right into a law school at Western Michigan?
Yeah, I had a short stop
Yeah.
working for the House Judiciary Committee on Capitol Hill. But I think, about 6 to 8 months after graduating, I was in grad school.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And I saw in an article that you were also a truck driver during that time, and a little foreshadowing of
Oh,
what you're doing
I was
now.
not a truck driver, but I owned a freight brokerage prior to starting TCS blockchain. So that's how I understand this problem so intimately. Because even though I didn't own a trucking company per se, this payments problem that we're going to get into, it impacts everybody in the supply chain. Trucking companies, brokerages, 3PLs, 4PLs, it's really an issue across the board.
Let's get into some fun trucking things. What is the craziest truck driving story you've ever heard or experienced?
I have a couple good ones, but one stands out, of course, for everybody, I think. We had a load of beef that was, and this was not our truck, right? It was a brokered load. So we were representing the shipper, was a beef company in Iowa. So it was a reefer load, filet mignon, almost $100,000 cargo value. The load was supposed to pick up in Iowa and go to Atlanta. We did at that time, this was geez, maybe 2017, something like that. So we didn't have all the cool track and trace technology back then that we have today. But we did ask the driver if we could ping his cell phone so we knew where the truck was and knew where the cargo was, and he said no problem. And the load was supposed to go to Atlanta. And about a couple hours after loading, we noticed that the truck was going to Chicago. And we called the driver, and the driver said, "Hey, I've got, 3 days transit on this. I've got more than enough time to get it to Atlanta. I've got family in Chicago. I need to get up there. And then I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and go to Atlanta." And we said, "Okay, no problem." Later that morning, we came in to ping the driver, and we couldn't ping the driver. And I called the owner of the trucking company, and he said, "Todd, I don't know what to tell you." And I feel that this company, the owner of this company, was solid, right? I mean, he was very candid. He said, "My driver's gone, my truck is gone, and the cargo is gone. So we literally had $100,000 load of filet mignon disappear in downtown Chicago. But I think the city ate well that weekend. So that's probably the best trucking story that I have. And of course, it then took a year to work all that out with the insurance companies and all the counterparties.
Yeah, maybe some of my relatives that have last names ending in vowels in Chicago made out on that deal, possibly. So
Maybe they at least, got a good fillet that weekend, right? Yeah, at a restaurant.
How about any good truck driver hacks that a normal person could do, since they're driving countless hours and overnights and all that?
Well, I tell you what, I think a lot of people really underestimate the acumen of truck drivers. There's a saying in the industry, PhD by podcast. You would be shocked the level of education and acumen that some of these gentlemen have. The first time I went to the Mid America Truck Show, I ended up at dinner with a couple truck drivers. And we were obviously there to talk about TCS, and we spent most of the dinner talking about fractional reserve lending, the fiat banking system, central bankers, inflation and deflationary market cycles. I mean, I was shocked. So
Right.
I think a lot of people take drivers for granted, specifically the owner operators and the folks that run small trucking companies. A lot of people don't realize this because when we're on the road, we see Werner and JB Hunt and Walmart. We see the big carriers. We see their trailers. 97% of the full truckload market in the United States is 1 to 6 truck operators. And that's critically important because what that means is if those companies disappeared tomorrow, the shelves would be empty in like 2 to 3 days. Like we'd be shooting squirrels in our backyard, right? Everybody got a little taste of
Right.
that during COVID, right? When we show up at the grocery store and it's like they're half stocked. So these companies are not only critical to the supply chain, but they're critical to the entire U.S. economy. They're the backbone of the U.S. economy, and a lot of these drivers are very smart business people. The problem is they just don't have a lot of good options to solve the problems that they have. But that's one of the reasons that the TCS is around now.
I have to ask one more question, and it probably has nothing to do with all you're doing currently. But I used to drive 75 miles one way from where I lived in Overland Park, Kansas, to St. Joe, Missouri, to work for Boehringer Ingelheim Animal Health. And so I drove on I-29, was 2-lane on each side,
Right.
and I would always notice, like, one semi would try to pass another, but they couldn't. The speed limit was 70, but they would pass, but they were only going 65, and they would always clock up the passing lane. Why do they move over and not be able to accelerate?
Yeah, and it's really bad when it's on an incline, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Because
It's terrible.
then it's almost like antithetical, right? I don't know if blockchain has a solution for that problem, but we'll workshop it. I'll promise you that.
Okay. So before you got into trucking, Todd, it looked like you were doing some maybe your own LLC, multifamily housing, residential properties, 100 plus, and some vacation properties internationally. What talk about that experience?
Yeah, got into commercial real estate holdings as a principal, which was wonderful. Nice to have a legal background for things like that. It's a lot of contracts and finance and solutions orientation that's required, and enjoyed my time in that industry. Unfortunately, the middle of my tenure in commercial real estate was plagued by the 2008 financial crisis, which changed the trajectory of a number of things. Never filed bankruptcy on an entity or anything like that, but it was very challenging. And I wanted, I was kind of done around 2012, 2013, because I live in Southwest Ohio. I live just south of the crossroads of America, I-70 and I-75. Now, I made that comment at OIDA's to a member of OIDA a couple of weeks ago, and they told me that that is not the crossroads of America anymore, but we've always referred to it that way. But I live just south of the crossroads, and Cincinnati is a major hub for full truckload brokerage and full truckload carriers. So I knew I had a lot of colleagues that were in the transportation industry. It's nearly a $3 trillion industry now. I knew a lot of people that were making a lot of money, and I decided that I wanted to make a pivot. Owned a freight brokerage for several years and learned a lot in that process.
Before you pivoted into Anderson Trucking and had the freight brokerage, I mean, you're basically out of law school, so you're, 25, 26, 27-ish, whatever the graduation date was, but you go into like a managing partner, like you go right into kind of your own business. Like, where did you get that kind of drive? And, most people are getting a job, a W-2 at a company, but, or going into a law firm or, talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess some of it's lineage, right? My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My father was an entrepreneur. I had one of the greatest jobs any college kid can have. I sold cars at a Chrysler Jeep dealership. I wasn't really liked at the dealership because I could only work like 35 hours a week because I was carrying 15 to 18 hours at UD, but I led the sales board almost every month, right? In terms of, total units sold. And funny, I was at the HDAX event, obviously with you a couple weeks ago, talking to Grant Cardone, who also sold cars when he was in
Right.
college. And we were
Wow.
joking that there are two types of people in the world. There are people who have sold cars and people who haven't. So I've always just had that like, entrepreneurial thread. And there are times where I've really scratched my head and said, why do you take all these things on? Like, there are easier paths, but it's just kind of how I'm wired, I guess.
Did you learn from a sales book, a mentor? Like, what was your kind of sales process to, work the least amount of hours probably of any salesperson and still, be the monthly, leader in units sold?
Well, it's funny the way I got the job. I was before that. I was waiting tables at a nice Italian restaurant, and I ended up waiting on the GM of a car dealership. And this party had a lot of wine. But at the end of the evening, he said, "Todd, have you ever thought about selling cars?" And I was like, "It's never crossed my mind." And he's like, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Well, what's the rake? What's the income?" And he told me, and I said, "That sounds really interesting. When would you like to interview?" And he's like, "Show up at the dealership tomorrow," which was a Sunday. So I show up at this dealership. The dealership's open for it was an Oldsmobile dealership. It was the first place that I worked. And they were open from 12 to 6 that Sunday because they were doing a push, pull, and drag promotion where if you could get your car onto the lot, they would give you $2,000 for it or show you $2,000 for it, right? My first day on the lot, I sold four used cars, and made like $1,500. And I said, I'm leaving the restaurant, right? I'm done.
Sure.
So that's kind of how it started. And I don't really know, I really hadn't done anything in sales before. Like I said, I was waiting tables, but that was kind of the impetus, I guess.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
What was your big aha moving into the trucking industry and the brokerage business? Like, you're like, holy shit, I didn't know this was going to happen.
Yeah, just people making a lot of money, right? And like any industry, typically, 10% of the team is generating 90% of the business development, right? You've got some people that are very good at that. And in logistics, you've got some people that are very good at just managing logistics, making sure that things pick up on time and get from A to B and deliver on time. But what I quickly realized is, I was good at managing people, and I was good at closing Fortune 1000 shippers. And I was customer facing with a number of Fortune 1000 shippers. One of my biggest moments working in the transportation industry was closing Walmart at their headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, right? And I was just able to talk to them and demonstrate value. And our focus at the brokerage was primarily food and CPG freight. I mean, 70% of all goods in the United States are on a truck at some point. So it's like you can move widgets, you can move fluids, you can move steel coils, or you can focus on food and CPG. But that was always where my focus was because I thought like this is cargo that's recession proof. People are not going to stop eating and stop consuming. And it's very time sensitive, right? If you're moving refrigerated freight, or even, dry freight that needs to be on shelves. It needs to get there on time. There needs to be great execution, but that execution is compensated, right? As opposed to, moving widgets or bags of corn or something like that, right?
Right.
So I guess my aha moment was, this is great. Like, there aren't many industries where you can just kind of jump in and then be in meetings with Fortune 1000 companies, publicly traded companies that have tons of freight on the road. And I loved that about the industry. It wasn't that difficult with effort to get in front of those people. And then once you're in front of them, you just have to do your job well, right? You got to make sure that things pick up on time and get from A to B on time, and the rest of it kind of takes care of itself.
Right. Why do you think there's an openness to especially like a Walmart that, there's so many, trucking brokerage firms and things like that. But why do you think they're so open to that?
It's simply because they have so much freight, right? So last I checked, Walmart has the largest trucking fleet in the world. But when I was working with Walmart, they were still outsourcing something like 30 to 40% of their total capacity, because they don't want W-2 company drivers under every single lane in their routing guide, right? Every company's trying to find that balance between, okay, we want to move X percentage of our routing guide on our assets, on our trucks, and we want to outsource the other portion to third party carriers and brokers. And, the country is, even though we've got some demographic issues right now in the country, we're not growing demographically the way we have historically. The population is still increasing every year, right? There's more and more consumption. I think the Trump administration has the right idea in terms of repatriating a lot of industry, trying to bring it back from other countries. That's going to lead to even more manufacturing and production, more goods moving on trucks. It's, there's a joke in the trucking industry, like, when's the last time you heard about them building a rail line? Now, I know
Right.
there's some big like M&A stuff going on in the rail industry right now, but as we advance as a country, we have more and more of the total percentage of freight moving on full truckload and LTL and intermodal and those things that touch the trucking industry. So there's just a ton of opportunity, and I think it will always be that way.
So you're at your own brokerage firm, Anderson Trucking. What made you pivot to the fleet transportation service and then become their chief commercial officer?
Yeah, so when I was working with Anderson, we were a broker agency for them, so we were kind of like a subsidiary underneath their brand. Fleet was a new company, a proprietary company that no longer had any affiliation with Anderson. I was a co-owner of that company. I took the title of chief commercial officer because that kind of means everything, right? Which is kind of what I did. I managed procurement events, I managed
Yeah,
RFPs, I did a lot of business development. I
yeah,
was on the road a lot, meeting with shippers and
yeah,
3PLs and 4PLs. So,
yeah,
but that was a great opportunity.
yeah. And so, okay, so you're in this trucking space, traditional trucking. So what piqued your interest in, getting the Web3 blockchain and becoming CEO of TCS?
It's a great question. So I was way too late to Bitcoin. I didn't buy any Bitcoin until 2017, but I did this the right way. Like, I went and read the Satoshi white paper, did a lot of due diligence and bought some Bitcoin. And I think that's so critically important for people who are trying to understand the industry better. You don't have to go out and buy a Bitcoin for $113,000, right? But you should set up a wallet on an exchange that you like, Kraken, Robinhood, Coinbase, INX, whatever, and buy something. Spend $10
Right,
on Bitcoin just so you can learn how the new digital asset economy is working. So that's what I did. And I set up accounts on a couple exchanges and, bought some Bitcoin, bought some ETH, bought some things that I shouldn't have bought. But I gained a fundamental understanding of how all of this stuff works. And then, and this is probably a good segue to your next question. During COVID, the supply chain got shut down and everybody was kind of scrambling. And then when things opened up again, it was like a hockey stick straight up. There was massive demand. So everybody wants to buy new trucks, buy new trailers, hire drivers, hire brokers, everybody's scaling up, 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 up. And of course, there's all this stimulus in the markets too, right? You had all this government spending that was kind of artificially propping things up and kind of changing the normal business and market cycles. And thankfully, at the time, my partner in Fleet was a former CEO and CFO, or I'm sorry, and CPA. Very, very bright guy. And he looked at me and he's like, Todd, we need to exit. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, everybody's at the punch bowl. This thing's going straight up. And he's like, and it's going to come straight down. And I really had problems with it, but ultimately, we decided that the right thing to do was to exit that business. At the time, I had already started working on TCS. He was working on some other things, and we didn't time it perfectly. That's really tough to do in any industry in any cycle. But I'd say we timed it, almost perfectly. And sure enough, it went down like a rock. And we are still in freight in the worst freight market cycle on record. We've lost over 50,000 motor carrier numbers. There's been a lot of M&A. There's been a lot of bankruptcies. And we could talk about this for hours, but when you see a company like Yellow YRC, which has been around for God, I don't know, 100 years and, has just about more market share in the LTL space than any other carrier. When you see a company like that go down, it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, being based in Kansas City, that was obviously a big story. I mean, they
Right.
basically just shut the doors down.
Right.
Like,
And there were a number of other issues, right? They had pension
yeah,
problems. They really had
yeah,
cost of capital problems because I'm sure you remember this, Jeff, around the time of COVID, benchmark interest rates were still like 0%, right? And
right.
then all of a sudden they were like 4%, 5%, and 6%, and 7%. And if you're a company that needs a lot of capital to operate, that'll blow out your P&L. So, I
Right.
mean, we saw it take down owner operators. We saw it take down huge carriers like YRC. So I credit my former partner for seeing that. I didn't see it, but I think it worked out perfectly because I was then able to, kind of fully focus my time and effort on TCS.
You start TCS, and there's one thing, starting a wallet and buying, a little bit of Bitcoin just to understand, this new technology and blockchain and tokenization. But like, how did you dig deep and then create and talk about what TCS does to create this whole thing, because it's so fascinating to me.
I think what a lot of people do is they jump in on the FOMO, right? If it's Bitcoin or a meme token or whatever. And I'm not disparaging anybody for doing that. I think everybody has a different journey in digital assets and blockchain. But I started with the Satoshi white paper. So when I saw the supply chains get shut down during COVID, I went back to the white paper and I said, wait a minute. The single largest problem in the US transportation industry, in the $2+ trillion American supply chain, is not a driver shortage. It's not truck parking. I mean, all of these things are issues, right? But the single largest problem is cost of capital. It's a payments problem. I don't care if you're a single truck owner operator or a brokerage owner or you're a 3PL or 4PL that has assets. Shippers pay in 30 to 180 days, almost all of them. And when I crossed the tracks into blockchain and I was meeting with people and I told them that I was customer facing with Fortune 100 US companies, publicly traded US companies that pay on net 180 terms, they didn't believe me. Like literally, you do all the work, you pick up the load of widgets, you pay for the insurance, the bonding, the payroll, the fuel, all the operating costs associated with the truck. You deliver the load and then you get an IOU that says we'll pay you in 6 months. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
Nobody can do that. No company can survive that. But these large companies understand supply and demand, and they understand that there are carriers that will take their freight on those terms because they can factor their invoices, right? They can go to a factoring company, which is really just a bank or some kind of financial intermediary, and they will get you paid in 1 to 2 days in lieu of waiting 30 to 180 days, which is great, but it's horrendously expensive, and the contracts are terrible. I run into so many trucking companies and some brokerages for that matter, and I'm like, "What are you paying right now?" And they say, "Oh, I got a 2.5% contract." Well, 2.5% sounds great, right? Like you and I would probably take 2.5% on our mortgage like any day of the year, right? What they don't realize is that 2.5% is a monthly rate, and they are literally paying a 30% annualized interest rate to get paid in 1 to 2 days because they can't wait 30 to 180 days to get paid. And on top of it, they have to sign these terrible contracts that requires them to pledge all of their future AR, all of their future accounts receivable, which means they're pledging all their future revenue, which means that some other company owns them, right? So to solve this problem, to get paid today or tomorrow, these companies are forced to basically give up their autonomy as businesses. And it crushes a lot of companies. So when I read the Satoshi white paper again during COVID, I was like, wait a minute. And I don't want to get anybody mad at me, right? Anybody that's like a Bitcoin maxi. I own Bitcoin. I like Bitcoin. Okay. Nothing against Bitcoin. But the thesis of Bitcoin was not to be a store of value. The thesis of Bitcoin was not to be digital gold and be an ETF product that Wall Street can buy and sell. The thesis of Bitcoin is blockchain is a better settlement rail than banking rails. It's got more immutability, it's got more transparency, it's faster, it's cheaper. The thesis was to disintermediate intermediaries, right? And create better, faster, cheaper peer-to-peer and business-to-business settlement rails. So when I went back to the white paper, I was like, wait a minute. Why can't we use a blockchain tech stack to provide faster and cheaper settlement rails to the transportation industry? So I wrote what in retrospect was kind of a bad white paper, but I kind of wrote like a 3-page white paper outlining the problem and solution. I took it out to the University of Wyoming Advanced Blockchain Lab. And, fast forward 3 years, here's TCS, 2 meetings at the White House since March, 100 trucks contracted on the platform, brokers working with us, and we're on pace right now for 100 million in flows through our tech stack by the end of the year. But that was kind of the genesis. That was the aha moment.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts, he creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
We were talking offline before I pressed record about your White House experience and going there twice, but talk about, what those meetings were about and what's the future in terms of TCS or you and the White House.
Yeah, and I do want to take the politics out of it. I'm a Ron Paul libertarian, so I kind of feel like both sides are the problem, right? But I am a huge supporter of the vision and actions of the Trump administration. The previous administration was outright adversarial to this industry. TCS, here we are trying to solve the largest problem in the U.S. supply chain, help small businesses, help trucking companies, help mitigate the cost of capital in supply chains. And we got debanked during Operation Choke Point 2.0. Literally, there were people in the federal government telling banking regulators to debank companies that were doing things in digital assets and blockchain. In my mind, this is categorically insane, right? Because what that would have ultimately led to is great companies like Coinbase, Kraken, there's a BitGo, there's a number of them, TCS, all these companies would have left the country, right? And innovation would have been happening in some other jurisdiction. But we've seen a 180-degree turn since January. We went from kind of operating in the shadows so we didn't get in trouble as we were trying to build up flows in beta with trucking companies that were working with us in beta to getting invited to the White House twice since March. And the reason for that is the White House has a mandate right now to reduce the cost of capital for businesses, reduce the cost of goods for consumers, and reduce the cost of housing, right? It's a fight against inflation. So when they learned that we were reducing the cost of capital for small businesses in the supply chain, again, these are the companies that are the backbone of the entire US economy, right? And they learned that by reducing cost of capital for these companies, we were also mitigating costs in the supply chain that every consumer and household is paying for, right? People have no idea that we have a silent value added tax in the supply chain. When you force 50% capital costs, a 50% annualized interest rate on a 3-truck operator to get paid in 1 to 2 days, all of that rolls downhill to the grocery store, right? That increases the carrier's cost of operations. They're going to charge more if they can get away with it. And it means that every household and consumer is paying more when they buy a box of cereal, right? So most people have no idea that this is even happening behind the scenes.
Right.
Like, not only are we getting hit with inflationary taxes, but we're getting hit with this silent VAT tax that has its genesis in this factoring problem in transportation. So I think that was really what piqued the White House's interest, on top of the fact that TCS, is an American blockchain company that is using a blockchain tech stack and innovation to solve a problem that nobody's been able to solve, right? So we got invited once. We got invited again in July. I then, and I can't even express my appreciation. The last time I was in Washington was in late July. I walked out of the meeting with the White House staff, and I was told to check my email, and I checked my email, and I had an invitation to the Genius Act signing ceremony,
Wow.
where the president signed the stablecoin bill into law. And they didn't send, I mean, there were probably only like 120 people at this signing ceremony. I don't think that they sent out that many invitations, but it was, I mean, just an amazing honor to get
Yeah.
invited. I was 2 rows from the president. Like, it was absolutely fantastic. And the White House has basically said, like, we want to keep tabs on what you're doing. We think it's important. And TCS has invited President Trump to join us at the Mid America Truck Show in March, which is the largest trucking show in the world. They typically see like 100,000 people over 3 days at this truck show. And I'm going to say on the White House, because I really think the president should be there. I think he should show up. Hopefully he will. But I think that would be a really great thing, because we are at an inflection moment where blockchain and digital assets are converging and intersecting with so many industries, right? Mark Cuban has this famous saying, like, when blockchain is able to solve a problem for legacy industries, let me know, right? And that's not the exact quote, but something along those lines. And we're now actually seeing that happen, right? The previous chapter of digital assets and blockchain reminds me a lot of like the first chapter of the railroad industry, right? There was a ton of speculation, there was a ton of malfeasance, there was a ton of nonsense. People were trying to figure out, like, who's doing what, is this stock real? But I think the industry has really matured. The Genius Act obviously is a huge deal. We're supposed to have the infrastructure bill passed by Congress between now and the end of the year, which I think means if that happens, the president will have it signed into law between now and the end of the year. And I think the United States has now resumed its proper role as the capital of blockchain and digital assets in the world. And that's exactly how it should be, because we were seeing all of this innovation and human capital and talent and acumen moving overseas during the previous administration. And thankfully, that's come to an end.
I'm a neophyte in this Web3 digital asset space, but just, listening to people like you, going to events like Carlin Digital Asset Exchange, reading the Satoshi white paper, and it was a clear message from everyone at that event on September 9th of this year that, you just have to get into it, just like open up a wallet, just like you said. So it's very interesting from that perspective. Are you having pushback, the people in your industry, the trucking industry, to kind of, grasp what you do for them? I mean, obviously you understand the money aspect, and it's 90% cheaper and faster than factoring and all those good things. But like because I know there's some you can pay in some cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin or get USD, US dollars. But explain that whole process and kind of what pushback do you get from kind of these traditional trucking industry people?
Well, yeah, and I'll share on the outset that one of the five largest freight factoring companies in the U.S. has already inquired about acquiring TCS. So we're on everybody's radar at this point, which is great. But we needed to make this as simple as possible, and we have. So the way that I explained this at the Mid America Truck Show, the way that I explain it when I talk to carriers, I was just at another truck show in Chicago all weekend, is it's pretty simple. You sign an agreement with TCS. By the way, it's a non-exclusive agreement, which is huge, right? Because factoring companies require exclusivity, right? So you're not only selling them accounts receivable today, but you're pledging as collateral all of your future accounts receivable, right? Which means if you ever need a business loan or something like that to grow your company, good luck, because somebody owns all of your future revenue. So TCS is non-exclusive. We are collateralizing and purchasing the AR that you're selling us today, but we're not collateralizing your future accounts receivable and revenue, because in my mind, that's never made any sense, right? If the AR that you're selling us isn't good, then we shouldn't be buying it, right? And TCS is a 0% default rate today. So we're pretty good at underwriting and collections and credit allocation. But for carriers, they have to sign an agreement with TCS, just like they would with a factoring company. And then they have to set up an account on the INX exchange. INX is a U.S. exchange. They're actually they're being acquired by Republic right now. I think that deal goes final at the end of the month, so it will soon be Republic. And I believe Morgan Stanley and a number of folks are on Fidelity's cap table, but this is a fully licensed, fully regulated digital asset exchange in addition to other products and solutions. But I explained to trucking companies that this is the equivalent of setting up a second business checking account, right? Everybody knows how to set up a business checking account. This is basically the same thing. You have to go through some paperwork. You've got to do KYC AML, right? So you're going through some due diligence with TCS. You're going through some due diligence setting up an account at INX. Once that account is set up, this is very easy. You can send us freight invoices by email, or you can send us freight invoices through the TCS mobile apps, which is called Freight Chain. So literally, if you're an owner operator, you can deliver a load. You can get your bill of lading, your account receivable. You can be standing on the dock. You can pull up the TCS app, scan the document with AI data image capture, and send it to us through the app. That's what initiates the settlement process. We make a buying decision, and you're getting paid same day or next day at the INX exchange. And how that works is we are going to directly deposit the current value of that invoice, the current USD value of that invoice, less our de minimis settlement fee, right? Which, as you said, is typically 50 to 90% cheaper than factoring, right? We're going to directly deposit those tokens into your account at INX. In 2 clicks, those tokens are sold and you have US dollars. So you can now keep the US dollars in your INX account. If you want to buy some Bitcoin, you're now on chain, right? You can buy Bitcoin, you can buy Ethereum. If you want to manage some payables in USDC or stable tokens, maybe you want to pay a driver, a Chicago driver who's out in California, right? But you don't want to send a wire or send an ACH. You could send stable coins to that driver at almost no cost through your INX exchange, right? But the point is you're now on chain. You're in Web3, and you're able to benefit from being engaged in the Web3 blockchain digital assets economy. If you don't care about any of that and you don't want any of that, then you just send those US dollars ACH from INX into your business checking account and you run your operation the same way that you were running it before. But you're
Right.
getting a better user experience, it's exponentially cheaper, and it's faster. People are like, well, that's a lot of work. They got to set up an account at INX and they got to get onto the app and they got to click 2 buttons. And I'm like, you've clearly never worked with a factoring company. Working with them is an unmitigated disaster. These companies are hated in the transportation. They are despised. But if you can't wait 30 to 180 days to get paid, you have to factor your invoices. And that's why 70% of the sector is factoring their invoices. But not only does your money sometimes not show up from the factoring folks, like I had that problem when I owned the brokerage. Like nobody called me or emailed me and said, "Oh, those funds aren't showing up today." We had to chase them down to find out that a remittance didn't match somewhere in the settlement stack. And that's why we didn't get paid. We ended up having to hire people to manage them. So here we are paying, this massive cost of capital to get paid sooner because we didn't want to wait 30 to 180 days to get paid by our shippers. And here we are having to hire a team to make sure that this company does what they say they're going to do. In addition, they force people into these draconian exclusivity agreements. We're working with a carrier right now in Chicago that has 20 trucks. Their termination fee to get out of their contract 3 months early is $150,000. The factoring companies charge a reserve fee, which is typically 3%, and most of them are going to charge you anywhere between 2 and 5% monthly. So if you're paying 2%, you're paying a 24% annualized interest rate, which is worse than most credit cards. If you're paying 5%, you're paying a 60% annualized interest rate, which is worse than a payday loan. And they're usually holding back 3 to 5% in reserve fees. This is a niche that is ripe for disintermediation. Anybody says that it's too difficult to set up the equivalent of a business checking account at INX and click two buttons to get to cash has never worked with a factoring company. I joke with people all the time and I say, look, if you told most trucking companies and brokerage owners that if they took their invoices at night and buried them in their backyard and came back in the morning and dug those invoices up out of the ground, that they could save 50 to 90%, they would absolutely do it, right? In terms of cost of capital. This is a hell of a lot easier than that.
Do you have any data points on the kind of the adoption rate of the actual truckers, the drivers, accepting Bitcoin or some old currency as payment versus US dollars?
Yeah, well, we only settle in TCS tokens. There's a reason for that, and without running down the rabbit hole, there are ways that TCS can monetize the transaction on the back end, which means that we charge our users, our customers, less. Right? That's how we're able to do what we're able to do. We would not be able to monetize the back end of the transaction if we settled in US dollars or if we settled in Bitcoin, or if we settled in some other crypto, because we would have to go buy that crypto to settle in that crypto, right? So we only settle in TCS tokens. What I can tell you right now is we are on pace for 100 million in flows moving through TCS by the end of the year. I believe we will easily clear 1 billion in flows next year. Our largest competitor, the largest incumbent freight factoring company in the United States, and I share this as a former customer of theirs, they're expensive, they're slow, they're antiquated, and their customers hate them, right? They have a $60 billion AUM. They manage 60 billion in freight invoice assets annualized, right? So when I say we're on pace for 100 million in flows and 1 billion next year, that is a drop in the bucket, right? When you're talking about an industry that's factoring about $1 trillion in receivables a year. But I can share with you that we're working with a couple companies right now, large trucking companies that are at scale. We're in the process of onboarding them. One of them is worth almost 200 million a year in flows. They have 530 trucks and they have a brokerage. When I say we're on pace for 1 billion in flows, if we onboarded 5 of those customers, we'd be in 1 billion in flows, right? TCS doesn't need 8,000 customers to get to 1 billion in flows. We could do it with 10 large trucking companies that are at scale. We are focused on the small guys as well. 97% of the industry is 1 to 6 trucks. So a lot of our customers are 1 to 6 truck operators and small brokerages.
I know TCS solution also helps with this, supply chain fraud issue. I guess it's a $1 billion problem in North America. So talk about that.
Yeah, the biggest fraud problem is this concept called double brokerage. And what happens is you have a real carrier that's a good guy. You have a real shipper, or maybe it's a broker, and this is a good party. And what happens is somebody gets in between them It's referred to as a double broker. So, and I won't get into the litany of all of this, but you have the intermediary in the middle that's a bad actor that takes the load from the broker or shipper and then tenders the load to the real trucking company that picks up the freight and delivers it. Okay, so the freight gets delivered. So to the shipper or the broker over here, it looks like everybody did their job. This party pays the intermediary, and the intermediary doesn't pay the trucking company that actually did the work. And it's $1 billion problem in the industry right now. One of the reasons it's $1 billion problem is because when the money moves, the freight's already moved, the freight's delivered. When the money moves, it moves on banking rails. There's no transparency and there's no immutability, and nobody can really tell where the money went. It's so funny to me when I hear the skeptics in Washington, some lawmakers that are like, blockchain and digital assets is a jurisdiction for illicit finance. Well, 99% of illicit finance in the world transacts in cash, and most of it transacts in US dollars. I'm not meaning to pick on Senator Menendez from New Jersey, who's now in, I believe, federal prison, but none of Senator Menendez's illicit activity was on blockchain rails, right? It was all in gold and cash and, physical assets. If you want to engage in malfeasance and illicit finance, the very worst place in the world you can be is on blockchain rails. Because there are companies like TRM Labs that can very quickly figure out exactly where the money went. And this is why this is important. So when TCS settles a carrier, and remember, the carrier has gone through KYC AML with us. They've gone through the same KYC AML due diligence process with INX to set up their wallet. Now we are sending tokens to a wallet. We can literally run a geolocate on that wallet and figure out exactly where that wallet is. So if this is a new company that is set up with us and they have a valid motor carrier authority from the Department of Transportation, and they're fully registered and licensed with FMCSA, and they tell us they're based in Gary, Indiana, and we run a geolocate on that wallet, and they're in North Korea, we know exactly what's going on. We know we're dealing with a double brokerage situation, and the money never moves to the bad actor. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is a solution to the entire billion-dollar fraud problem, but I am, a huge advocate of the idea that I don't believe you can solve the fraud problem on banking rails, because there are a bunch of companies out there with SaaS platforms that are offering solutions, and I'm not seeing any mitigation happening in the fraud problem. I'm also a firm believer that in 3 to 5 years, all business to business settlement is going to be on chain because it's faster and cheaper and there's more transparency and immutability. Amazon announced on May 1st, and they haven't done it yet, and I don't know if they're going to because this was before the Genius Act became law, but Amazon announced on May 1st that they're going to issue a stable token for B2B freight transactions. Amazon is a factoring company, right? I don't know what their terms are, but they're also a factoring company in addition to, a grocery store and all the other things that Amazon does. I think in 3 to 5 years, all B2B settlement is going to be on chain. And the companies that think that things are just going to stay the way that they are going to be disintermediated and disrupted and lose market share at a rapid pace. Just because there are so many advantages to managing B2B and peer-to-peer transactions on chain.
Todd, you've mentioned the Genius Act a couple times. For those of us that don't know, including myself, just a brief summary of what that act is and what it does for people.
Well, it's a very long bill and a very long law. But before we had the Genius Act, and I won't go deep in the reads on this, but managing transactions in stable tokens wasn't illegal, but it also wasn't legal in the United States. And there was an argument between the SEC and the CFTC. One regulates securities, one regulates commodities, about who had jurisdiction over digital assets and blockchain, what the rules of the road were, and who could do what. And the CFTC and SEC couldn't figure it out. They, both of them wanted jurisdiction. So really, that's because Congress needed to act. If you go back and look at our Constitution, Congress is supposed to make the laws, not administrative agencies like the SEC and CFTC. Now, there's a lot of Supreme Court precedent on all of this stuff. Some of it's new, but Congress, I think we all can agree, our elected representatives are the ones that are supposed to make the laws. So Congress did legislate. The Genius Act cleared the House and the Senate. It's now been signed by the president. And basically what it says in, the quickest synopsis that I can give is that there is nothing unlawful as long as you're not engaged in illicit activity or anything that's, malfeasance or nonsensical or illegal. So stable tokens are now the law of the land in the United States. You can transact in them as a business or as a consumer. And we just saw the state of Wyoming issue the first government-backed stable token in North America. So literally, Wyoming has a stable token that is issued and regulated and managed by the state. And for every $1, it's called the Frontier token. For every $1 that they originate in Frontier token, they have to be holding $1 in U.S. Treasuries to back that stable token. And without going into a ton of detail, the token is also backed by the full faith and credit of the state of Wyoming, which is a natural resource state and has a ton of assets. So not only do we have the private sector engaged in the stable token arena, companies like Circle and Tether and Figure, but we now have states like Wyoming, who are getting involved because it offers tremendous benefits to the citizens of Wyoming to have this asset that people can transact in. And it's going to be very interesting to see over the next couple of years if other states follow suit, right? If all of a sudden Wyoming, just to throw out a number, has $1 billion in flows through their stable token, that means that they have to own $1 billion in US Treasuries. And that means that Wyoming is getting paid a rate of interest from the Fed on that $1 billion in US Treasuries. So that interest, if it's 4 or 4.5%, is now coming into the coffers of the state of Wyoming as revenue. That was revenue that Wyoming would not have had but for its stable token. So all of this is still very new and innovative, but I do believe we're going to see tech forward states look at Wyoming and say, you know what, why aren't we doing this? It's going to be a very interesting 3 to 5 years.
You mentioned, the Satoshi white paper and, just starting a wallet. Any other advice to kind of the average U.S. citizen that I would say safely that basically knows nothing about the digital asset space to kind of start learning about it?
Yeah, the only other piece of advice that I have is, every industry has been nascent when it started, right? And I talked a little earlier about the railroad industry. The railroad industry was riddled with fraud when it started, right? There were all kinds of members of Congress who lost their seats because they were engaged in bribery and it was insane.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if you've ever watched the show Hell on Wheels, but it's all about the railroad, being built from the East Coast out to, interestingly, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and
Right.
then out to California. Right.
Yeah.
Cheyenne used to be the end of the road. Right. That was the end of the world for the railroad.
Right.
But I just think it's important to zoom out a little bit and step back. I think most people who are commercially reasonable would say that in this previous chapter of the digital asset and blockchain industry, probably 90% of it was nonsense, right? We had this whole chapter of, non-fungible tokens, right? NFTs, people buying artwork, and we saw that go up, 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 and then it crashed, right? But every industry is nascent when it's new.
Right.
So focus, if you're interested in digital assets and blockchain, don't write off the entire industry. Focus on the 5% or the 10%, the rock solid companies that are now, many of which, by the way, are doing IPOs and becoming publicly traded companies. We just saw Circle IPO, we saw Figure IPO, Coinbase is IPO'd. Focus on the companies that, if you want, that are publicly traded, or the companies that you feel comfortable with. And in the case of an exchange, open up a wallet and buy $10 of Bitcoin and just learn the process and
Right.
get engaged. And really, if you do that or not, I think as we move forward, crypto is just going to become blockchain rails is going to become the back end. Just kind of how we saw like the internet become the back end of a lot of different use cases and solutions. In time, it's going to become the back end, and nobody's really going to know that they're transacting on blockchain rails. But I think it's good to at least dip your toes and
Right.
gain some understanding. And maybe, just maybe, you find, based on your education and experience, a great use case that can utilize blockchain rails and solve a problem.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting to me, but I would say safely that the average American citizen doesn't understand how money works. To the existing money infrastructure works today. So
Yeah, I tell
yeah,
people all the time, like, we're transacting and this is not to beat up on the US dollar, right? It's the world reserve currency. It's the reason that we have the standard of living in this country that we have, right? But the dollar is backed by nothing, and annualized inflation is between 3 and 6%, right? The dollar used to be backed by gold. Now it's backed by nothing. We have a $30 trillion national debt, and the dollar loses 3 to 6% of its value every year. So,
right,
is doing something new and different really that crazy
right.
when that's what we're doing now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could do a whole talk on, we're on the hamster wheel because debt equals money, money equals debt, and we grow by getting more debt out there, whether
Right, right.
personally, the government, or, Todd, I love helping two groups of people with great advice from, thought leaders like yourself. But one's that recent college graduate or maybe even high school graduate that decides not to go to university. As they begin their professional career and look for that first job, what advice would you have for them?
Little cliche, but never stop fighting and never stop learning. Right. What I do, it's interesting. When I was in law school, the class that I hated the absolute most was secure transactions. I was like, what in the world am I ever going to use secure transactions for? And I now, am the CEO of a company that has a heavy emphasis in secure transactions.
Right.
But my point is, I didn't learn anything about finance, trade finance, digital assets, capital markets, blockchain. I didn't learn any of that in college. I didn't learn any of that in grad school, right? But never stop learning because, and I tell my three teenage daughters this and they roll their eyes at me, right? We've seen more innovation in the last 100 years than the rest of recorded history combined.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to change. So the world is moving fast, technology is moving fast, and I think people who don't go to school or go to school and then check out, I think that that's the worst thing that you can do. I think there's always more to learn. And that's one of the things that I love about the blockchain digital asset industry is like once you start that trip down the rabbit hole, like the rabbit hole doesn't end. Like I'll never, I know I have colleagues who can run circles around me. They'll forget more about blockchain and digital assets than I'll ever know, right? Developers, but it's those types of things are very exciting to me because I think there's a lot of industries that you can get bored in very quickly because it's just rinse, wash, repeat.
Right.
Digital assets and blockchain isn't one of them.
The other group I love to give advice to is that, everybody starts out of college, maybe not you, but as an individual contributor, and anyone can be a leader at an organization, right? But those that want to take that step where they're a manager, first time manager, have a group of people under them that they're responsible for, what advice would you give them, Todd?
Yeah, I would say listen to podcasts, try to find mentors in your life, people who have accomplished some of the things that you'd like to accomplish. And nowadays, there are some really great leadership management certification programs, right? With some are great colleges and universities, some are maybe lesser known. I think probably the core content is very similar. And it kind of goes back to the never stop learning thing, right?
Right.
If you see yourself as a future C-suiter, if you see yourself as a manager, a leader, or an entrepreneur, there are ways to continue to develop that skill set.
Todd, thanks so much for coming on the corporate couch. I learned so much from you in our time together, and excited to see what you and TCS do in the future.
Really appreciate it, Jeff. Thanks for the time.
Todd Ziegler, I don't know if I had an episode, a conversation with somebody on the corporate couch where I had so many insights. I'm not a trucking expert. I'm not a blockchain expert or digital asset expert, but like I went back on this episode, Joe, and I'm like, there are so many good things. Like it's a mini masterclass on the trucking industry and blockchain technology, especially how his company solves like a $1 billion fraud issue in the trucking industry. And like I said, so many insights I had no idea about, in terms of, the factoring, and really it's costing truckers and trucking companies, or trucking companies 30 to 60%. They're paying basically a high end tax, like you're getting not tax but credit, where they're all this factoring stuff, and it's like a payday loan.
Yeah,
basically at high rates. It's only 2.5% a month, but that's 30% a year. And he was funny too. I said, "What's your funniest trucking story?" Because the guy went from, he's working at a restaurant, and then the GM of the local car dealerships had too much wine and said, "Hey, do you want to sell cars? I think you'd be good at it." Reports the next day, sells 4 cars and made $1,500. He goes, bye restaurant, bye being a waiter. And then he gets in the trucking industry, and he becomes a freight broker, has his own freight broking company, and now he's a blockchain CEO, helping truckers get paid faster, trucking companies to get paid faster, eliminating fraud. I mean, it was, like I said, it was so many great things about it. And then he said when he had the trucking company, $100,000 of filet mignon disappeared in downtown Chicago.
He's had a bunch of stories like that, didn't he?
Oh my God. And then, you and I drove the St. Joe from Metro Kansas City area every day. I think my commute was like an hour and 15 minutes with no traffic. Yours was an hour and a half. And, my dilemma, every day was, you drive on I-29 north and coming back south, and these truckers would try to pass each other, and it's 70 miles an hour, and they'd be going 65 in the passing lane. I'm like, why would they? And you can't do anything. You're blocked. He didn't have a solution for that, or didn't want to give me one. He just said blockchain, I don't think can solve that. But I'm like, why does it happen all the time? So anyhow, I could talk about this episode all day long, but what are your thoughts?
He had a lot of little bitty insights like that. Like he talked about, you think that truckers are not usually real well educated or anything, but a lot of them have a PhD by podcast, is what he called it.
Yes. Oh yeah, that was phenomenal, because they spend so much time in the cab.
What do you do?
Driving. And they have it's an MBA in any subject they want to listen to.
Whatever they want to listen to, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. Sirius XM satellite radio has a couple of different trucker channels just for that kind of thing, where they talk about the trucking industry all the time. They play country music like the truckers like, and they have these PhD podcasts all the time. It was really, really interesting. He talked about a whole bunch of different acronyms. Like we were supposed to know what he was talking about, and I knew what some of them were. Some of them I had to look up, but all this stuff just flows from him all the time. He is just a wealth of knowledge, and this concept of, he discovered this thing in the trucking industry of fraud. And some of it wasn't fraud. I don't think he used the word payday loans. I think we kind of attached that to it.
Yeah, he did not.
But that's essentially what it was a payday loan against your accounts receivable. Yeah. He discovered that he could run the same operation, charge a lot less money, bank it with blockchain or cryptocurrency or something like that, and provide some investment opportunities that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And you kind of wonder, well, gee, I wonder if you could do that with other industries. I don't know. We're the same thing as so-and-so company, but with blockchain,
Well, yeah, Danny Bear that we interviewed for the Heartland Digital Asset, they're doing it in the life insurance. I mean, it's
life insurance, but it's with blockchain. And we did the other one where it was real estate, but it was blockchain. And so it was interesting. There were so many different directions that interview could have gone. You could rewind it and listen to it again, and you will hear something else.
Yeah, and plus the fact he talked about, we're recording here on Halloween 2025, you and I, and he talked about the previous administration prior to 2025, where they basically they shut down like cryptocurrency. I think he said it was Operation Choke Point 2.0. And he's been to the White House twice since March of 2025, attending the Genius Act signing ceremony 2 rows from the president, because, they were asking his opinion about, bringing, all these acts that are opening up the blockchain technology and the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So it's just, there's so many good learnings. Like I said, I could have talked to Todd another hour.
It just goes on and on. It was a great interview. Loved it.
Joe, what's the latest and greatest in your life? What's happening?
I've discovered something. Do you know what the difference is between a camera and socks?
No. What is it?
Here it is. A camera takes photos. Socks take 5 toes.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.